In this market update, we're going to be talking about the state of the consumer. Hi, Jim Gore from THOR Wealth Management. Back last year on March 8th, we did a market update that talked about the state of the consumer. At that time, the consumer was pretty good. So now we're going to give you an update on the consumer almost a year later. First and foremost, we have to see what's happening with the consumer from savings rate. And if you look at this chart here, this is going back to the 70s and 60s, and you can see that the savings rate back then, these were the people that lived through the Great Depression, their savings rates were 10 to 15%. It has dropped down to 5% or below, and COVID had jumped up and it's dropped down right now to one of its lowest levels. And we're hearing from our sources, some people are thinking, our investment managers that we work with, that their savings right now for consumer is probably going to last anywhere from 3 to 9 months out forward before they're going to really run out of savings completely. We don't know the answer, but so we have to look at other things. And one of the things you have to look at is what banks are doing. Banks are smart. They're lending money out to the consumer and they want to make sure that they get paid back. So this chart here is looking at what banks are doing if they're tightening their lending practices, their standards for consumers. And you can see here it really has shot up, and we're having 26% of the banks now are saying that they are tightening their standards, and I wouldn't be surprised if that goes up. Banks do that because they know that the consumer is suffering and that they want to make sure that, hey, if we're going to lend this money out, we want to get paid for it. The next chart I want to look at is what banks are doing with auto loans. And auto loans right now have shot up. We're over 8% now to borrow a car, to borrow money for a car. So this is not good for the auto industry because they were able to raise prices. They're not going to be able to raise prices because guess what? For the consumer, prices are already gone up even more because they're borrowing at over 8% for an auto loan. What is that telling you? Well, if they're lending you at 8%, there's some things going on with the loan delinquencies and people not paying on their debt that they have to go ahead and take the cars back, repossess those cars. So banks are now charging over 8%. Higher, if you notice, than what we were back in 2008 and 2009 during that recession. The next thing that we want to look at, this is an interesting chart, and this is looking at the credit debt levels for consumers. And last time we talked about this, hey, it dipped down during COVID and it was back up to normal. But what we've seen though is it's gone up even higher than what it was. And so consumers are putting a lot of money on the credit card debt. And the bad news is if you look at the next chart here, they're paying a much higher rate of interest. Actually, it's one of the highest interest rates we've seen. And from just the last time we gave this update, it's up to 2.5%. You're paying over 21.5% for credit card debts. And so, if you're not paying that off, that debt level is going to increase exponentially like we're seeing already with the federal deficit. So the consumer is not in as great a shape as they were back when we did this a year ago. And so we're starting to see some stress on that level. The last thing we want to look at, and this goes with why banks are raising interest rates, is delinquencies. And this is looking at the delinquencies on the credit cards. And you can see, we were talking about them going up, but actually now they're higher than before COVID. They're not as high as they were back in 2007 and 2008, but guess what? They're going up. And as delinquencies go up, as I said, banks are not stupid. Banks are very smart. And with the banks, by raising their interest rates on auto loans and credit cards, which credit cards are completely, they can go after your estate, but they're unsecured investments. A car, at least, is secured by the car and they can repossess the car. That's why it's at 8%. Credit card, they can't repossess anything. And if you go to Chapter 11, guess what? Credit card debt is expunged, and that's why the rates are so high. So all in all, what this is telling us is that things have changed in the last year. The consumer is not as healthy as they were. They're increasing their debt levels, and the banks are telling us a story. The banks are telling us that, hey, the consumer is getting pretty tight here and we're not lending out as much. And if they're not lending as much, that should have a dampening effect on the economy. If you have any questions or concerns, as always, reach out to us at thorwealthmanagement.com or give us a call. Take care and talk to you in a couple of weeks.